Hey guys, Jim here. We're going to do something a little bit different. I haven't done any real ramble videos or anything like that, anything that wasn't specific to one knife sitting under my lens in a long time. And what I kind of wanted to talk about today was what I look for in a good high quality flipper knife. Now, let me begin this by saying this is, really going to be opinion based. You may have different wants, needs, and desires than I do. So don't take this as like a buying guide. There is no hard and fast rule as to what the best type of flipper is or any particular methodology behind it, whether it be a bushing system or a bearing system. Everybody's going to have their own personal preferences. I'm just going to share my preferences with you and give you an idea of what I look for in a quality flipper. Now, when I go way back to 2009, when I made that transition from production knives to buying my very first custom, which was built for me by Brian Ty, it gave me an idea of what better quality materials, fit and finish, and hand fitting really, why that makes a big difference. And I bought a few great knives at the time, then I stopped for a while. I took kind of a hiatus. I kind of went, I really like where my collection is at. I don't really need anything else. And then it was the sighting of the bodega on the internet that pulled me right back in. And I went, holy shit, that is probably one of the baddest ass knives that I've ever seen in my life, and I need to have one. And I chased it down and I paid all kinds of money. You guys know the story behind Big Red. Big Red is the most famous knife on my channel. Maybe the battle is number 2. Everybody knows Big Red. So when I got this, I didn't have a lot of high-end flippers at the time. And I went, this is the most amazing action that I've ever felt in my life. This is the perfect flipper. And still to this day, it's one of the best flippers I've ever owned. Now, it doesn't have a very hard detent, and I tend to favor a very sharp or very hard detent, but it's just right. I have another knife in here that's kind of the same way. Like, it's not a super hard detent, but yet it fires perfectly every time. And that's this guy right here, the Marfion closer. It's a fairly light detent, but it just screams open. And that's really in the quality of how the knife is made. Now, my bodega was recently upgraded. Todd was kind enough to upgrade me into the ceramic IKBS and put the ceramic ball here. That wasn't available back when this was made. I bought this in October of 2012. So that wasn't available back then. And it's just a little bit smoother and a little bit nicer than it was before. But it wasn't a night and day difference because the knife was made so damn well to begin with. There are things that I look for in any folder, and that's going to be the overall fit and finish. I don't want to see... here's a good example. So when I look in here, come on, I got to cover up most of the background so that it will focus. I want to see good fit and finish through here. I want to see it in here. I want the internal components of my knife to be as well planned out and well taken care of as the outside. Steve Skiff, who made this, is certainly very good at that. Excellent knife. Beautiful fit and finish. I mean, he even jeweled the interior and everything, so he went above and beyond. But some of the things I look for is, how the materials are mated together, how clean that work is done. You don't feel a bunch of speed bumps all the way around it. Now, that's not to, as I'm talking about bolsters here, that's not to say that there aren't bolsters that you should feel. In this type of design, it's meant to kind of meld together. So you shouldn't feel anything, and obviously Frank Fisher has perfected that. But there are certain knives where they'll actually be where the scale material dips down and the bolster material dips down and creates a valley because that was done purposefully. Now, because you can feel that doesn't mean it's not made well, it's just made to a different design. And that unfortunately has been misunderstood in some of my previous videos, so I do want to clear that up. But it's about how all the materials flow together, all that special handwork that you're paying for. When you're buying a custom knife, you're not just paying for the sum of its parts. Okay, a knife like this, you're looking at titanium, L-Max steel, the ceramic bearings and stuff. You're not paying a tremendous amount of money just for the materials. You're paying for the hand craftsmanship. You're paying for the time it took them to design it, whether they do the work on CNC, or it looks like it's on CNC, but it's done by hand on a manual mill, like my Jim Burke here. You're paying for that different degree of work and labor and creativity. That's the way it is. If you look at an artist and say, oh, I know what all those materials cost, and I have an idea how much you have to spend for your consumables and your tools, and I factor all that in, and I'm going to offer you X amount of money. What they should do is hand you a bunch of fucking parts for that amount of money and say, here you go. And when you act all surprised, go, oh, is there something missing? Because you paid for what you have in the box here. If you'd like the complete package, you kind of need to fucking pay for it. And a lot of people don't get that. They're used to buying production knives, and there's nothing wrong with just buying production knives. But when you make that step up, you have to realize why you're paying the extra money. Cadillac makes a hell of a car. But there's a big difference between a $70,000, $80,000, $100,000 Cadillac and a $350,000 Bentley. You know why? Because they're fucking coach built. Because they're built by hand. There's a lot more labor involved. The materials being used, even on the interior, are better. So you're always going to pay for quality. And that's where I am with my collection. I prefer custom knives. Every now and then, a production or mid-tech will pique my interest. Custom Knife Factory. These guys can pretty much do no wrong. I mean, they are putting out a superior product in every way. So let's talk about my wants and desires for a flipper. I'm going to move most of these out of frame just because my camera wants to focus on multiple objects instead of the object that I'm holding. And I'm not really sure where I'm going to start. Okay, we'll start with the closer. You know what? No, I want something that's a little bit more traditional. Let's look at a frame lock. One of the things that I learned early on, and Todd Begg actually taught me this, and this will apply to any folder, is again, you want to see that the fit and finish has been carried out in the lesser seen areas. You don't want to see a raw finish on the back side of the blade. You don't want to see it all chipped up and banged up on the back side where the lock accesses the blade or locks up with it. You want to see good refinement, good quality. Another thing that you do, unlock the knife and try to get any side-to-side or axial play in that pivot. Now this Darryl Ralph has absolutely none. And people go, well, it drops so freely like that. That's not a symbol of how smooth it is. It's just that the pivot's loose. Nope, not at all. I have no up and down play. And when I release that lock, so this is where some makers can cheat the system a little bit. As long as that lock is engaged, it won't move side to side or axial. But if I unlock it, now that lock is no longer holding that blade in place. It's going to be all about the pivot. And that, my friends, is a major thing to look for. I cannot tell you how many expensive custom knives I've put in my hands that have failed that very, very simple test. It really is a big deal. So making sure that that pivot is set properly is a big deal. Another big deal is going to be your lock geometry. You want a lock that engages enough that it's completely solid, but it's not all the way over, and it's not sitting just teeny tiny at the edge. Having an early lockup is a good thing because it gives it, over time, over years, a little bit of room for that lock to walk over. But what you don't want is that it starts walking over all the way. You start getting lock rock because it's not engaging in the same way. So you definitely want to make sure that you've got a good solid contact. It's not too little, it's not too much. I'm a big fan of Chris Reeve knives, most of you know that, but they have a very late lockup. It's usually 50 to 60%. That's totally acceptable and it's rock solid. But if I'm picking up a knife that's like 80%, 90% lockup, I'd put it right back down on the table and never purchase it. Because over time, it is going to wear, especially on a knife where you have a titanium lock bar hitting up against steel. Steel is much harder than titanium, especially hardened steel, and it's going to wear down that titanium. This has a steel lock bar insert. That is something I prefer to see. If it doesn't have a steel lock bar insert, it doesn't make it trash. You just want to at least make sure that the edge of that lock, whether it's a liner lock or frame lock, is done in a carbonized fashion. If they carbonize it, it hardens the titanium, and it pretty much matches the hardness of the steel, so you're not going to get that premature wear. Now, you'll see in a lot of my videos where I'm flipping the knife and I release it and I do this and I let gravity drop it. I'm not doing that to say that if your knife doesn't drop free, it's not high quality. I'm doing it because you're not sitting here holding this knife. And one of the thoughts in your mind is, how smooth is the action? And I could do this all day long and tell you how smooth it is. But when I do this, when I disengage that lock and let gravity do it, I'm not shaking it, I'm not jerking it to drop down. I'm just very easily letting it drop. That gives you, the viewer, a sense of how smooth that action really is. Now, that can be faked to some degree by having a very, very, very heavy blade. That can be done, especially if it's on bearings. I look at my number one, still my number one favorite knife, is my Frank Fisher Battle. It doesn't do that. I have to really wiggle it. Now, it's still wonderfully smooth, but I've got quite a bit of lock bar tension. So I have to really jiggle it and jerk it around to get it to do that. But the action on this is superb. And when you walk it down with your finger, which is really how you're actually going to close your knife, you can feel how smooth that is. Everything about this knife is flawless, complete perfection. While I'm here, fuck it, might as well just address it. I've actually had inexperienced people viewing my battle video, and they've left comments, well, that's not good fit and finish because I see a big old gap between the carbon fiber and that lock. Yeah, because it's a bolster lock, dude. Bolster lock is basically a frame lock that has a scale over it. So when the knife is closed, that lock bar is pushed over back where it was. There's no gap in there. It's perfect. But when the lock engages, it has to move over, and yes, there will be a space there. And that will exist on every bolster lock knife that has ever been made in the history of fucking everything. So I just wanted to clarify that, because you always get somebody, they don't do it where they ask a question. They don't go, well, what's the deal with that? What would cause that? No, it's a piece of shit. Look at that big old fucking gap there. R. By the way, that is the exact voice that I read your troll comments in, just so you know. So maybe spend a little bit of time being diplomatic and asking a question because you don't know the answer, instead of making it sound like, I don't know, what I'm showing you is garbage or something. I don't know, it just irks me when people do that kind of shit. When we talk about smoothness, you're really going to get a great smooth action out of bearings. But it doesn't mean that a bushing style or a washer style pivot is out of the question. My Jim Burke here, Jim is old school, man. He prefers bushings. Now, ever since the Dead Man Walking, he has started doing bearings, but he still does a lot on washers. And you know what? It flips great. Notice the shape of the flipper tab. Notice that it's directly above and even slightly forward of the pivot. And that gives you a greater degree of performance in a lot of cases. All I've got to do is pull straight back on it. Now that was designed by Tashi, who did the collaboration with Jim. Jim made the knife, Tashi designed it. Great design on his flipper tabs. Flipper tabs that are somewhat laid back. See how this one is really far behind the center point of the pivot. That's not going to be really a light switching style of flipper. It can be done, but this has a particularly soft detent. It may not always go to full lockup. This one, because of its relation to the pivot, really would prefer to be what I call push buttoned, or what everybody calls push buttoned. And every time I'll get a nice snappy flip. Maybe not always light switching it. So when you're buying into a flipper, you need to decide, which way do I want to be able to flip it? Do I want to light switch it or push button it? Me, I'll do either or. as long as I'm prepared for that, as long as that's what I'm comfortable with on the particular knife. There are some knives that no matter what you do, it is always going to go to full lock. One of the big benefits on my Turpin is the fact that he does hand checkering. Some guys will leave it completely smooth, not always a good idea. Really needs to be the proper shape of tab for your finger to really grab onto it. Some guys will do simple jimping, which is usually wonderfully effective. But I prefer this. This is actual checkering like you would see on the front strap or the mainspring housing on a 1911. It actually grips my finger. So no matter how my finger lands on this thing, even just the edge of my finger, it's always going to engage that flipper tab, and it's always going to flip it open quickly and easily. So those are the basic things that I look for in a flipper. There could be a number of different styles. I like to have, there you go again, great serrations, or jimping I should say. It's ahead of the pivot because they had the room in this particular frame design. If it wasn't shaped like this, it'd probably be directly above it. But this wants me to put the pressure straight back, and that allows this extraordinarily large blade to come flying out. And yes, kiddies, I have nailed my thumb many times with this knife. But you get used to it and learn to get your fucking thumb out of the way. You know what? For a $400 knife, this is why Custom Knife Factory is dominating right now, and everything they make sells out almost instantly. For 400 bucks, I'd put that up against pretty much any custom out there. The action, the fit and finish, the materials, the design, the complexity of the manufacturing, it's insane. This is one of my favorite knives. There are a lot of ways that you can go. Always, always look for the action that you prefer. If you want a light detent for whatever reason, specify that to the maker. If you want a medium or a strong detent, make sure you specify that to the maker when you're having it made, because many makers will make that adjustment specific to you. You gotta realize, when you're selling a product to the general public, there are a lot of different tastes out there. And if they make it only one way, they may alienate a lot of customers. I know guys that can't buy a Pohan Lu or a David Mosier because they believe in a sharp and very strong flat-faced detent, which I love. But a lot of guys go, ugh, oh, ah, oh, I hurt my little finger. And then they don't like it, they don't buy it. So that alienates that sector of the buying community. So at that point, if you're getting it custom made, specify and let them know what you prefer, because you know what? It is the custom knife world. It's made for you. Whether you buy a liner lock, which you see here, or you buy a sub frame lock, a frame lock, or a bolster lock, they should all operate pretty much the same. They should lock up solid. You should have a good amount of lock tension to push that detent into the detent hole, but not so much that it's pushing on and dragging on that blade. That's one thing people forget. You may have the best bearing system in the world. You may have your pivot absolutely perfect. You may have it all nailed. And I've had some delivered to me like this, with so much lock bar tension that the bearing, or that the detent ball was scraping the blade so hard, it added so much friction, it took away from the overall action of the knife. So be mindful of the lock bar tension. Too much, it's going to be a pain in the ass and people aren't going to want to play with their knife a lot. Too little, and then your detent's not going to lock in and your blade's going to shake out. Or it's going to be so weak that every time you just breathe on it, it's going to go, and you don't want it to go, because that's no fun. You want a nice, quick, snappy action. So that's what I look for when I'm buying into a flipper. Again, your opinions may differ, and that's totally fine, because this is really going to be based on personal preferences. And the array of knives that I've shown you here really do exhibit a lot of different things. This is really a medium detent. Tony perfected this knife. It didn't need a strong detent in order to operate flawlessly. He just nailed it. This has a medium detent. This has a soft detent. strong and sharp, and you saw the difference in the way that it fires. This is strong and sharp with a flat face detent. It has a very unique sound when it fires. This has a pretty strong detent. My Darryl Ralph Dominator, strong detent. Medium detent on the Steve Skiff. Kind of between medium and strong on the Decepticon, oddly enough. Dustin Turpin loves a strong detent. And Old Faithful Big Red, my baby, the one that'll get left to one of my sons, pretty much a medium detent. But all the ones you see here fire phenomenally. They flip very well. The least in the performance of the flipping action on this table is the Jim Burke. And it's just because it has that medium detent and it's washers instead of bearings. But when you learn how to properly flip it, it does a really, really great job, especially for such a massive blade. So take into account the weight of your blade, the thickness of the blade stock, the length of it, the smoothness of the style of pivot that's being used, the detent strength, the lock bar tension, and the pivot. If all those things are done right, there's no excuse. There's no reason not to have a perfect flipper. One more thing before my camera cuts me off here. People ask all the time, I hear a slight scraping, a screeching from a couple of my knives every now and then. That's going to be your detent ball dragging against the blade. You put a teeny tiny, and I mean the tiniest little drop of lube on a Q-tip, and then dab it on a paper towel, just so there's not too much. And then you just wipe that across the face of the detent ball. That sound should go away, and it will probably go away forever. You'll also notice that your knife might operate a little bit more smoothly too. Get that past the lock. Nice and smooth. So there you go, guys. That's how I buy my flippers. That's the stuff that I look for. Let me know, are there things that you look for that are different that maybe I missed and maybe I should be looking out for? Or is this pretty much how you're shopping as well? I'll see you guys on the next video.